Hello, I'm Ron Miscavige, and this is Life After Scientology. And that song you just heard to open up the show is a song I did on an album I did in 1974 in England. And I didn't want to do it, I'll be honest with you, but my producer and a great arranger talked me into it. It's a Tchaikovsky piece, and he did a pop version of it. So to get even with him, when we put it on the actual record, I called it Enoch Balzavich's Triumphant Return to Poland as an inside joke. Anyway, it came out okay, but I had my druthers, I wouldn't have done it. But there you go. And if you want to listen to the whole thing, just go on my site, The Real Ron Miscavige, go to Music and Media, click on Music, and it's on this album. It's called Timeless. So you can either listen to it or buy a copy. I think it's $1, something like that. Anyway, to get rolling, before I get started, and I got a great guest on today. He's a guy I know for decades. We were just talking about it before the show started, and the time goes by. It's unreal. But I know him since he was 16 years old and he first came into the Sea Organization. Before we get into that, I want to thank those of you who contribute and who are contributing to being a Patreon. And that is Mary Ruffner for $5. Thank you very much, Mary. Very much appreciated. Jenny Greenwood, $5. Thank you very much, honey. And then we have Terry L. Grant. Nice going, Terry. $20, and I very much appreciate that also. And then we have Jocelyn Lehman, who upped her contribution from $2 to $5, and I want to thank you very much too. Now, if those of you who don't know what Patreon is, it's this. And if you go to my website, it'll show you how you can do this. You can contribute some money toward the ongoingness of the show because, as I've said many times in the past, we don't have a sponsor. And quite frankly, I don't want one because I don't want somebody telling me what I can or can't do. The whole idea of this show is to have people come on and tell their whole story without me throwing them under the bus or taking an 8-hour interview and later on editing it down to 10 minutes, and God knows what the hell that message would be at that point, like they've done to me, like they did to Lori Hodgson and other people who have been interviewed by major news stations. They interview you for 6 to 8 hours, and then they put maybe a 5-minute bite on. So you come on this program if you're invited, and it's up to me to invite you, obviously. You can tell your whole story. I'm not going to throw you under the bus. You got a chance to tell it as you see it, as it happened to you. So without any further words, I'm going to stop myself from keeping on going on this. Please welcome Marc Headley. Good morning, Marc.
Good morning, Ron. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure, buddy. And I tell you, just to get started on this, I mentioned to our audience that I met you when you were 16 years old. And
yeah, that's right.
That's how old you were when you came to Sea Org, right?
That's right. That was back in the early 1990s. So, yeah.
You came in as a kid, but boy, you rose to one of the highest positions in the entire org. But before we get into that, why not go back a little further in time to tell us about your childhood? As a matter of fact, I wouldn't mind you telling me about where you grew up and how it was and how you actually got in Scientology. Were your parents Scientologists or what?
Yeah. So in 1979, my parents moved from Kansas City to Los Angeles. So my dad was a musician. He was a bass musician. And he was in a band, and the band was going to make it big. So they went to Hollywood. And there was some talk of a record deal and certain things that were happening. So we packed up everything and we moved to Hollywood. That was in late 1979. And one of the members of the band, his name was Steve Smuck. That was his Steve Schmuck. That was his actual name.
You're not joking now?
I'm not joking. That was his actual given name, Steve Schmuck.
Imagine you're in a room with him and say, "Hey, Schmuck, come here."
Yeah, no, that was his name.
Okay.
And he changed it. And his stage name was, God, I think it was Steve Collins was his band. It was his stage name. But but he was involved in Scientology. And through him, my mother got involved in Scientology, and my dad didn't really take to it. And so it was really my mom was the main force that became involved. And then we lived right off Franklin Avenue, which is where the Celebrity Center is. When we first moved to Los Angeles, Steve lived right near Beechwood Canyon, which is just a couple blocks west of where the Scientology Celebrity Center is. And then we ended up getting an apartment right across the street from Celebrity Center. It was called the Shangri Lodge, and it was an apartment building right on Tamarind. And that's where my dad ended up living. And then my mom moved all around through the time that she was in Los Angeles. And as soon as she got into Scientology, I'm not sure what went down, but I think there was some sort of ultimatum, like, if you don't join Scientology, then we're going to get a divorce to my dad. And my dad didn't join, so they divorced.
I got it.
And then so that we lived my sister and I were shuttled back and forth between them for most of our childhoods. But because my mom was in Scientology, she wanted me to go to a Scientology school. So at that time, I went to Apple School, which was located in Los Feliz. And it was right next to the a big TV station. I think it was CBS or ABC that it was right next door to. And I went to school with there was a girl there named Soleil Moonfry, and she played Punky Brewster on a TV show. And then there was another kid. Her older brother was Mino Palouse, and he was on a TV show. And then one of the kids in my class, one of my friends, his name was Barrett Oliver, and he was in movies and TV shows, and he was like a pretty big deal when we were little kids. Yeah. And crazy enough, he actually ended up working with me at Golden Era Productions years and years later.
I remember him. I remember him being cured.
Yeah, he was the talent chief in the Cine division at Gold.
Wow.
And anyway, but so Apple School was pretty cool. They didn't have a lot of Scientology influence, really. They had some basic study stuff that was Scientology based or Hubbard technology based. And look up words you don't understand and those kind of things. Right. But other than that, it was pretty much a regular school. And it was a pretty awesome school because it was a full campus. So they had football teams and soccer teams, and it was its own compound. And it was huge. And I really liked Apple School in terms of a school compared to the public school I went to and that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden I couldn't go there anymore because I think the people who ran the school, I never actually found out what the exact story was, but the lady and her husband, I think it was Bruce and Bonnie Bishop, who ran the school, they were declared suppressives. So anyone who was a Scientologist that was at the school, they had to leave.
Wow.
Because it was an SP school or something. Anyway, so then I ended up having to go back to public school. And around this time, my mom lived in Venice Beach, California. And Venice Beach in the early 1980s was very, very, it was very ghetto. It was not like a cool hipster kind of place to live like it is now. It's like an artsy fartsy kind of community.
I have a question, Mark.
Yeah.
Is Venice Beach, did they ever call it Muscle Beach, where like a lot of these bodybuilders would go and do training and stuff, or is that a different one? Am I thinking?
No, that's exactly the one. Venice Beach is sort of a town, Venice, and then Venice Beach has on it the boardwalk and Muscle Beach and all these sort of things. There's street performers but yes, Venice Beach is where Muscle Beach is, and also where Arnold Schwarzenegger used to work out at the beach. Yeah. I think they shot Pumping Iron there, one of his movies, and also Gold's Gym is in Venice as well, which is
Yeah.
another gym that he worked out with. It was that Gold's Gym was about 3 blocks from where we lived. So
Wow.
I was at I went to Gold's Gym all the time. It was a very cool place to go and check. It was cool to do people watching when you're a little kid.
Oh yeah, I bet it was, you know.
But when we moved to Venice, I had to go back to public school. And the public school that I happened to go to that was in our district based on where we lived, I was one of 2 Caucasian kids that went to that school.
No kidding.
And yeah, so I had a pretty rough, that was a rough time period for me. I think I grew about a foot in about a year. My body just physically grew to compensate for the physical beatings I was getting every single day.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
But,
that's the adventures of life, huh?
Yeah, right. So then they opened up another Scientology school in La Cañada, California, which is, I want to say about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Venice.
Right.
And that was this new school that was going to be run. And it was actually, this is kind of crazy, but it was being run by people that used to work in Scientology, and they weren't allowed to work in Scientology organizations anymore because they had been part of what was called the Guardians organization.
Right.
And the Guardians organization perpetrated the largest infiltration into the US government in its history. And I think 11 people went to jail, including
Mary Sue Hubbard.
That's exactly correct, including Mary Sue Hubbard, Hubbard's wife at the time.
Yeah.
So the people who ran Delphi, like the guy who was the headmaster of Delphi when I started going there, he was a guy named Henning Helt. He was one of the people that was in the GO that was arrested, and I'm pretty sure he did jail time. Jeez. He was the headmaster of the Scientology school that I started going to.
Unbelievable. You got a con.
And the teachers, right? Yeah, the teachers, and there was all sorts of characters that were involved with the school that were main players in this big GO flap that had happened, like the Willardsons, and there was so many people, but the Moxons, the Willardsons, all these different families who had been part of the GO were now running this school, Delphi, in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And that school, like where Apple School kind of had like a tinge of Scientology, Delphi was 100%. They had an org board, you had study tech, you had courses, check seats, clay demos, the examiner with the e-meters, everything that you'd see in a Scientology organization. They had the school kind of little bit watered down version of that at Delphi.
And didn't they actually, well, they were actually training ground for kids growing up to join the Sea Org.
Yeah, it got to a point where it was sort of a little bit of a rivalry or a war between the Sea Org and Delphi, because Delphi was trying to train kids and get them graduated, and they could never graduate because they would always get scooped up. About 16, 17, the Sea Org recruiters would come to the school and just take the kids and take them off to the Sea Org. And it's funny because the kids that went to that school, it was very similar to Apple School in the fact that we had a lot of kids there because it was in LA, a lot of kids that became Hollywood stars. So yeah. Elizabeth Moss went to Delphi. She's in a big show right now called The Handmaid's Tale or something like that. She went to Delphi. Vonnie Ribisi, he's a pretty big actor. He went to Delphi. His sister Marissa was there. I think Lindsay Bartleson might have gone there. She was a famous actress for a little while. There was a lot of kids there that became involved in Scientology and as well in Hollywood. And the kids that weren't stars and weren't famous, most of them went on to work at Scientology organizations or actually joined the Sea Org. So of the class that I was in, I would say half became involved in Scientology full time or actual Sea Org members.
That's
And
wild. No.
yeah, and even people like Sky Dayton, who was a big internet guy. He started a company called Earthlink.
Right.
He went to Delphi, Oregon. And there's some other another family, the Dorings. I think they went to Delphi, Oregon as well. And so between Delphi, Los Angeles, and Delphi, Oregon, a lot of these up and coming Scientologists and up and coming Hollywood stars kind of came through the Delphi system, and they're sort of pruned and you know, you when you're doing Scientology all day as part of your childhood, when they try to get you into Scientology to do courses at the organization or join the Sea Org, you're sort of already in the groove. You know all the routines, you know how all the procedures work, you know how to do Scientology courses. You're basically, you're ready to go, as opposed to somebody who's just beginning in Scientology and then they want that person to join the Sea Org. That person has years and years of indoctrination to be able to get up to speed to be in the Sea Org. So you're right. Delphi was definitely a training ground. And when I got recruited for the Sea Org, it was in 1989, and I was 16. Actually, I think I was 15 when I got recruited, and then I turned 16 in the Sea Org. So I was 15 years old. I hadn't finished high school.
Yeah.
At the time, I was doing a work study program because I had moved out of my mother's house. My dad moved off to the Midwest. And I wasn't getting along with my mom because she wanted me to do Scientology. She basically wanted me to do Scientology full time and do courses at night and be doing Delphi during the day. And I was trying to be a kid. And so I ended up doing a work study program where I was living with one of the teachers at Delphi. And then I was also working half the day to pay for my own schooling. And then the other half of the day I was being a student. And
how did you afford to eat? Is this why you worked also?
A lot of ramen. Yeah. Yeah, it was a lot of ramen, a lot of ham sandwiches, and a lot of noodles. But I was having to pay rent.
I'm sorry. Go on.
I was having to pay rent, my food, figure out how to get to school, figure out how to get home. And, at 15, that was a little bit of it was a little harrowing. It was a little stressful. Cause you kind of go from whatever. And then all of a sudden it's like, I gotta make rent this month. What am I doing here? And I was doing a lot of side work and a lot of odd jobs to try and scrape up cash. And, anyway, yeah, it was pretty crazy, but, they had a rule at Delphi at this point because they had lost so many students to the Sea Org that the recruiters could not talk to students on the school property.
Yeah.
So if they wanted to try and recruit the students, they had to get the students to come to them at the organization in Los Angeles. They couldn't come onto the property, the school property, and talk to the students.
Well, that's a pretty sane rule as far as I'm concerned, because you're getting yourself into a mess that you don't realize what you're getting into at that age.
Totally. Well, unfortunate for me, because I was a staff member at the school. I was an employee.
Yeah.
They were able to circumvent that rule and say, well, we're not talking to a student, we're talking to the staff.
Wow. Hey, look, I want to back up just 1 second, because we mentioned about your dad being a musician, and you mentioned to me privately, before we did this show, that he played at some of the clubs there. So what were some of the places that he played at around around Celebrity Center?
Oh, well, there was actually right across the street from Celebrity Center, there was a corner bar. It was several things over the years, but when they used to play at it, it was a club called $2 Bills. And it was a really cool little spot, and they used to gig there. Then it became a place called Radion, and I think they might have played once or twice there when it was Radion, but Radion was really a punk bar, so that was mainly the punk scene happening there. But he also played at the Whiskey Go-Go, the Troubadour, all the standard clubs that you play at when you're trying to make it big in LA, on the Sunset Strip and down there in the in that area. And yeah, there was about, I want to say probably 2 or 3 times that they were like, tomorrow we're getting signed. Like, we're going to the record company and we're getting signed. There was probably, that happened a few times. They had released some singles, they had cassettes that were released, they had all these things that were happening. And I remember the kind of the final blow to like, we're gonna make it big, was there was this guy that was being their producer, and his name was Deshaun. And Deshaun was this, I don't know where he was from, but he had a lot of money. He had a really brilliant house in the Hollywood Hills. And Deshaun was just financing. He was paying for the record pressings. He was paying all this stuff. And he had connections, and he was going to get them hooked up. And Deshaun went off on like a safari for 2 or 3 weeks. And when he went on
Africa,
I don't know where. He just went off on safari.
Okay.
And he went off, and he was going to be gone for 2 or 3 weeks. And when he came back, that was it. They were getting signed. And he had this guy house sitting. And this guy that was house sitting had blowout parties every single night that Deshaun was gone. And Deshaun had this amazing wine cellar filled with hundreds and maybe millions of dollars worth of wine. It was giant. You could get lost in this wine cellar. Anyway, this house sitter dude, they drank all the wine.
Unbelievable.
They destroyed the house. And when Deshaun came back, he was flat broke, because the house was where most of his money was.
Wow.
And because he'd lost all that money, he couldn't finance the band anymore. And that was it.
Well,
and I was a
Yeah.
And I was a kid, and I was up at this house all the time. It was amazing. It was truly an amazing house. And when I found out that they weren't going to get signed, I was really sad, but I was like, I'm more pissed that I can't go back to that awesome house anymore. That place was the bomb, right?
Oh. If that isn't Hollywood, I don't know what the hell is. You know what I mean?
It was exactly like, oh yeah, that happens about once a day there.
Yeah.
But so that was the end of it. And then after that, oh, hold on a second. My kids have friends that are coming over. There's the doorbell.
There you go.
They're not here. My kids left. I kicked them out. There's about 10 girls on our street, little girls that are my kids' ages. And they come over here every morning that the kids are not in school. And there's about 10 or 12 of the kids that play around the cul-de-sac here. And
let me tell our listening audience, because I know your children, and I'm going to tell you something. He has 3 good-looking boys. Well, look at Mark, and if you knew his wife, she's good-looking. You're not going to have ugly pumpkins. So I can see the girls coming over to see your boys at this early age. All right.
Yeah, it's a lot of work here.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's what my dad. So then, sort of after that, I think my dad still played a lot, and they still gigged and stuff like that. But it sort of kind of fell apart by the time the late 80s came around. My dad had moved off to the Midwest and gave up the whole musician thing. And he actually went back to college and became a certified computer technician.
Wow.
So he went on to work for IBM and Dell and all this sort of thing. But so while he was off doing that, I got recruited at Delphi for the Sea Org. And they told me that I didn't want to join the Sea Org. I had no interest in joining the Sea Org. I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up across the street from the Celebrity Center. And then later on, my mom, she moved down by the Complex, which is that big blue building that Scientology has in Los Angeles. Right. And so she lived across the street from the Complex. So if I lived with her, I was over at the complex. And if I was with my dad, I was over at Celebrity Center. So no matter where I lived for most of my childhood, I was right in the thick of the Sea Org, right next to where they had all their people. And I saw the kids and I saw the birthing and the living conditions. And I would never be able to do that. I would never to be able to live like that. And I saw them working at all hours of the night. Anyway, so the recruiters, they were actually from ABLE, which is the Association for Better Living and Education, which coincidentally is kind of the organization that took over from the GO. The Guardian's office had like an intelligence arm, which is like spying and hiring private investigators. And then they had a social kind of PR arm, which was called SOCO, or social coordination. Right. And so OSA, which is the Office of Special Affairs, took over the spy wing, like the counter espionage part of the GO, and like ABLE,
Germany, right?
Yeah, the Gestapo of Scientology, and SOCO took over all the PR front groups, and that then became ABLE, the Association for Better Living and Education, and both of these organizations are Sea Org organizations, but ABLE is the Sea Org organization that runs Narconon. It runs Applied Scholastics, which is the parent organization over Delphi, that Applied Scholastics license and runs the schools of that are under them. And then Narconon, the Way to Happiness, and Criminon. So those are the four kind of front groups that ABLE oversees and does fundraising and management for. And so there was a couple, Martha and Boris Levitsky, and they wanted to go to China and do some stuff for Applied Scholastics. And ABLE said, okay, that's fine. You can go to China, but before you go to China, you have to recruit 10 people for ABLE, for the Sea Org. And Martha and Boris Levitsky weren't even in the Sea organization. They were just public Scientologists. And Boris Levitsky had actually won a Religious Freedom Medal of Honor from Scientology, from the International Association of Scientology, for a lot of the Applied Scholastics work that he had done in Russia. Right. And that was just maybe a year or two before this time when he's trying to recruit me. So he was sort of a big deal in Scientology. And they didn't want me to join the Sea Org. They wanted me to go to Narconon. And there was a new Narconon that they were going to open up in Oklahoma called Narconon Chilocco. And they wanted me to go and work at Chilocco. And I was going to be helping getting people off drugs. I was going to be they said I'd be making like $250, $300 a week. I was going to have all my room and board paid for. And basically, I was going to get to go and do this really cool thing. Go to Oklahoma and go do this work at this drug rehab facility. And I wasn't going to have to go to school anymore. And I wasn't going to have to figure out how to pay rent. And I wasn't going to have to figure out how I was going to eat. So they kind of tailored their little recruitment to basically handle all of the major problems that I was having in life. Right. Because I was sick of school. I was sick of working at the school. Yeah. And I was sort of stressed out I was 15. I was stressed out about how I was going to, make my monthly nut at 15. And so going to Narconon was sort of a no-brainer. Like, oh, this is perfect. I can just one fell swoop, just kill all these problems. Right. And then go off and do this cool thing, start a venture. And I like helping people. I was working at the school. I liked working at the school because I liked helping the kids. And I was a soccer coach, and I helped the staff get through their training for their posts and stuff like that. So I was like, I could go do this. That's an easy thing. Yeah. Anyway, so of course I join up for the Sea Org. And then after you start doing your Sea Org basic courses, you find out like, oh, I get it. Once you become a cog in the Sea Org machine, even though I was going to be like a Sea Org missionaire going to Chilocco and running a Narconon, what I kind of had the idea of. As soon as you join the Sea Org, you find out, no, once you're in there, they can just send you wherever you want. Yeah. Wherever they want. Wherever
they want. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not going. And that's as soon as I got in there, I realized I'm probably not going to end up at Narconon. I'm pretty sure that was just a little scheme to get me in here.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the second I completed my EPF, which is the Estates Project Force, which is something that every Sea Org member has to do in order to become a Sea Org member. As soon as I finished that, they said, okay, we're going over to Able. We're going to get you signed up and routed into the org and all that. And I said, oh, really? What am I going to do? They said, oh, you're going to be the vice president for personnel, which is sort of like the HAS, the HCO area sec, which is the executive over the communications department, the ethics department, and the personnel department. So It's a big executive at an international Sea Org organization. And I've been in the Sea Org for 2 weeks. And it's like, here you go. You're going to be in charge of recruiting people for the Sea Org, being the policeman for all the people that work at Able, and also all the incoming mail and outgoing mail and bulk promotion and mailings. And so, yeah.
At 15 years old with no life experience doing exactly that, right?
Exactly. And no high school diploma, no real world work experience or anything. And so, yeah, so I was on that post. I was able to recruit one single person the entire time I was on that post. And that person happened to be my sister, Stephanie. Yeah. And I recruited her, and then I made her the person that then had to do all the things that I was supposed to do. So she became the Hubbard Communications Officer, HCO COPE officer. So she was supposed to handle everything while I sort of got the area under control. And so she ended up doing all the mailings and trying to do some recruitment stuff. And anyway, I failed miserably at that post. And then I ended up getting busted off that post. And my sister took over for me. And then the post that I then was transferred to was a lateral move. So even though I had been removed and busted from the post, I got made the Treasury Secretary, which is the person responsible for all of the income and all of the disbursements and all of the records and assets and material for the organization.
Yeah, and that is actually lateral, right across the org board. It's not down or up.
Yeah, exactly. So I was kind of bewildered at that point. Like, really? I'm such a schmuck. I'm such a horrible division head that you're just going to make me the head of another division that doesn't have anybody in it. which I learned over the years. That's a standard Sea Org personnel move all day long.
Sanity does not reign in the world of the Sea Organization. We both know that. So
yeah, if there's a personnel hole, they just stick somebody in it. They don't have to know anything about it. They don't have to have any experience in that area. There's almost no rhyme or reason on how people end up on certain posts. And which, again, I would learn even more so once I arrived at the international headquarters, which came very quickly. There was a girl that I went to school with, and her name was Ollie Mintz. And she will play a key part in my getting to the Ant base a little bit here. What happened was a mission in the Sea Org. A mission is when they send 2 or 3 or 20 people out to an area to handle some real or imagined situation that's occurring in that area. And they send these people out there with orders to rectify the situation and then get it to where they want it. And then those people go back to wherever they came from. Well, a mission came from the Ant base down to Los Angeles to recruit, I think it was like 30 people for the Ant base, because they just had some big flap at the Ant base and they needed a whole bunch of new people to man up some areas that had been completely cleaned out. And so this mission came down and they showed me this list and my sister was on it. And I was like, okay, so fine. So my sister's going to go to the Ant base. Whoop-de-doo. Great. Good luck. See ya. I didn't really know what the Ant base was. I just know people just disappeared to there and then we never saw them ever again.
Yeah.
And they were like, read the list again, dummy. And I read the list again, and my name was on the list too. And then they said, yeah, you're going to INT. And I said, well, I just got this new post. And they said, no, you were never officially posted as the Has. So getting busted off the Has post, that was all bull. And you're never officially posted in Treasury. So we don't even need to replace you. You're done. Get up, get your stuff. You're out of here. And because I hadn't really done anything or been anywhere, they had this procedure, which you had to get all these security checks, these interrogations on the e-meter.
Right.
And usually these people have been in Scientology for 20 years. They've got all kinds of baggage and all kinds of things they've done or not done, or these people they were involved with. And they got to could spend a year getting these interrogations to cough up all this stuff.
Right.
Well, I was a green weenie. I hadn't done anything. I've been in the Sea Org for a few months. I was at a school. And then before that, I was just a little kid going to, I was middle school kid.
Yeah.
So my sec check, my interrogation, I want to say it was like a week. I was done. And
wow.
I just coasted through the whole thing. And a guy by the name of Bruce Hines was the guy who ended up doing my interrogation. Him and a girl named Pat Bromley were the ones that did it. And in a week, I was done, and I was at the INT base. I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so then when I got to the INT base, I found out what had happened was they had an area that produced cassette tapes. And the area that was producing these cassette tapes they were horrible quality. And they had made 300,000 of these cassette tapes that were unusable, unsellable. And so everyone who worked in the area that made the masters for the cassette tape area and all the people that were in the cassette tape area were all sent to the Rehabilitation Project Force, which is sort of you have the EPF, which is the Estates Project Force. And that's for people that are new into the Sea Org that kind of indoctrinate them to become Sea Org members. And then you have the RPF, which is the Rehabilitation Project Force. And that's sort of the labor camp that you get to be re-indoctrinated, rehabilitated or
reprogrammed, basically.
Reprogrammed, exactly. Reprogrammed to maybe be able to enter the Sea Org again, reintegration into the Sea Org. And so everyone in those areas had been sent to the Rehabilitation Project Force, except for one single girl. And that girl's name was Clarice. And Clarice Brousseau, or her maiden name, Clarice Barnett, was Shelley Miscavige's sister.
Right.
And so Clarice, I think when she was working in the cassette tape area, she was like a lieutenant junior grade or something. She had more bars than a prison cell on her shoulders. She was loaded. And when I got there, I think she was like a chief petty officer. She had no officer bars. She was demoted to a CPO, which is kind of like I don't know. It's like if you're just
the Army.
Yeah, it's like if you're in the Sea Org for 3 or 4 years, you could. I mean, I was a CPO. She was a CPO, and she'd been in the Sea Org. Pretty sure she'd been in the Sea Org for like 25 years at this point.
Well, yeah, her and Shelley went in with their little girls,
Yeah. So she was the only single person that was left in the Sea Org. I mean, in the cassette tape area when I showed up there, and she was the one who kind of showed me the ropes and told me what to do and all that good stuff. But anyway, so then I worked there for a while. I became the quality control. No pressure. All the last guys produced 300,000 overt product cassettes. You're going to be the guy that makes sure they don't do that again. Yeah. So I became the and it was funny because the post title was the pancake quality control, because the tape arrived on these giant reels from TDK, the manufacturer, and the reels it's just one big long cassette tape on one single hub, and it was called a pancake. That's actually what TDK called this big flat thing of tape, was called a pancake. They
almost looked like a long play record, a 78 RPM. You remember those big ones?
They looked exactly like an LP, and they were just a little thicker.
Yep.
But they look just like that, and they cost about $30. Each pancake cost $30. I remember, because if we ever broke one, then we had to pay for it. So I paid for a lot of those pancakes, because just when you're putting them on the machine, sometimes they'll fall off of the actual machine or the hub.
Yeah.
And
there's no way
anyway,
to get it.
yeah. Anyway, so I'm just telling these kids to go away now. They're getting their battering ram. They're about to blow the door down. The little girls from the street. Anyway, so my official post title was the Pancake Quality Control Officer. That was my actual Sea Org designated post title. And I did that post for a few years, and I was on the night shift. And we had another full set of people that were on the day shift that did the same thing. And then I became the quality control officer for all of Golden Era Productions. So I was responsible for not only checking the cassettes, also the videos, DVDs, films. I mean, at one point, I was checking your scoring submissions that you were sending up.
I do remember that, Mark. I do remember that.
I would sit there and here and this is another good example of not knowing anything. I don't know how to write music. I don't know how to play any instrument. I can play a little bit of trumpet, because I did trumpet for 2 years in elementary school, and I can actually play the touch tone telephone. I can actually play music on the telephone. And that's it. And both of those I do horribly at that. And here I was, and by this time I was this is probably 1993. So I'm about 19, 20 years old.
Yeah. And
I'm checking Ron Miscavige's scoring submissions. He's been writing and playing music his entire life, and he's doing these submissions. And that was another thing, is that because I was in gold, any submissions that went out of gold, that went up past gold to David Miscavige, to chairman of the board, to COB, had to be checked by the quality control gold.
Right.
And it got to a point, I would say, and this is kind of Dave sort of created this situation himself by taking out every single post that would normally receive these submissions and approve them. He would either take those people out or say, you're not qualified to be the final decision maker. So after you check it, you got to send it to me. There was hundreds and hundreds of submissions coming from all parts of Golden Era Productions that had to be checked by Dave. So you had a scoring submission. So you're writing a score for a video or for a film.
Yeah.
Dave had to approve that. Then there was, when the music was made and it was mixed, he had to approve the music mix.
Right.
Then when they did the VOs, and then they did the final mix with the music and the VOs together and sound effects or anything else, then he had to approve that. That was just a few submissions for music. Yeah. Then you have music video mixes, film mixes, film scores, film final mixes, film music mixes, any kind of ads. Like if we were making ads for TV, those all had to be approved. Commercials, any sort of commercials that would go before a film, you name it. And that was just for audio. You had the same thing for cine. He had to approve their daily rushes. So the film they shot each day, the shots that would make up a film, he had to approve those. So I was like a one-armed paper hanger floating around that property. I was checking stuff all day, every day. Stuff I didn't even, like, I had to look up what it was. Like, what the fuck is a score? Like, what am I looking at? Is the score submission? Hold on a second. Let me go get a dictionary and find out what a score is before I check this thing. You know, that's sort of how it was for everything. And and I was sitting in the studio with these mixers who'd been mixing. And at this time, there was a lot of paid professionals that were there.
Oh, yeah.
So you had a guy there, Mick Sturgeon. This guy he mixed AC/DC. He was mixing live concerts. Right. And I'm checking his work. Like the absurdity of it was just like, here's this kid doesn't even have any hair on his balls. He's checking my work. What's up with this? What kind of place is this? Anyway, but yeah, so that went on for a while. And then I don't remember actually how I think what happened, what happened was I went to Florida and David Miscavige had all these systems. He had audiovisual systems all over the world, but he had in each of his offices, he had audiovisual systems. And I was there in Florida to redo the systems in his offices, his apartment, and in the auditorium at the Flag Land Base.
Right.
And I was still the QC Gold, but I was sent on this project or mission to go make all this stuff nice. And I had a knack for audiovisual systems, and I sort of dabbled in that my entire time at Golden Era Productions. So it was kind of a natural choice because I was good on his lines, and he actually appreciated that I was sometimes rejecting things before they got to him.
Yeah.
And catching things that were bad so that he didn't, like stupid things, not anything that a trained person had to catch, just like, oh, you forgot to put the video in the submission, you dumbo. I'm rejecting it, and things like that. But he heard about it. So I was looked upon favorably by his office or by him or whatever, by Shelley, I think, really. And so I was in Florida, and I'll remember one time because you were there, I had redone a bunch of stuff in his office. And when he turned his system back on, it was making this hissy noise. And this was the office at the WB.
Right.
And he called you and Biddy over to the office. And then he told this whole, and everything is a show with him. Whenever somebody gets in trouble, it's always, there's a setup, and then there's people there for the person to be embarrassed in front of.
Yep.
And then there's the payoff of this is what, so he tells this whole story about how he's had this office for so many years. It works every day. He comes in, he turns it on. It works like a charm. It's never a problem, blah, blah, blah. And then yesterday, Headley comes over here. He does a bunch of stuff in my office. And sure enough, what happens? And that's when that's the payoff. So now you and Biddy are there. And then he turns on the system and it goes, makes this really loud hissy noise. And then he turns the volume back down. He goes, that's what happened after Headley fixed my system. Anyway, so then he dismisses you guys. You guys go off. And then he says, what are we going to do, man? And I said, well, sir, you have a piece of equipment. It was this Manley. There's this guy that used to make all kinds of stuff for gold. His name was David Manley. And he had this little shop in Chino, California. And he made all kinds of stuff for all the studios all over gold. And all of Dave's offices had this one device from him. And it was a digital to analog converter, or an analog to digital converter, or both. It was an A to D and a D to A. Right. Anyway, every once in a while, these things would freak out and they'd make this hissing noise. And all you had to do was just unplug the thing and plug it back in. It was fine. Anyway, so I knew this, and I'd seen it happen a million times in the studios. He just had never had it happen in one of his offices. So I said, well, sir, pretty sure if you give me 1 second, I can fix that. It's that converter right there. And sometimes it wigs out. You unplug it, you plug it back in, everything's back to normal. And he didn't like that I was kind of being so flippant. Like this was serious. Like I just got a dressing down and I was supposed to be embarrassed. And I was just sort of like, whatever, dude, turn the goddamn thing off, turn it back on. We're good to go. Let's go. Come on. What's with all the drama? Yep. Anyway, so he kind of gave me like an ultimatum. If you turn that thing off and on and it's fine, everything's good. But if it isn't, it's your ass. And so I was just like, okay. I went over, I unplugged it, I counted to 10. And him and all his staff are all looking at me like, this fucking dude's crazy, man. He's just like, he doesn't give a shit. And I'm like, 1, 2, 3, 1 alligator, 2 alligator, 3 alligator, just like trying to make it as comical as I can. I plug it back in, turn it on. It's wonderful. Everything's good. I go, will there be anything else, sir? And he literally just looked at me like, you motherfucker. Anyway, and that was it. I got out of there and I was just like, okay, good. Whatever. Whoop-de-doo. And then about a week later, there was some big flap that happened in the auditorium.
Right.
And this girl named Jenny Jenny Linson, she came, we were about to play this film for all of the Flag crew. And Dave was going to introduce it. And he'd been working on this mix down back at Gold for months and months and months. He knew this thing inside and out. And he had a lot of attention on the bass. He spent all this time making the subs, the bass on this film, just amazing. And right before the film was about to play, Jenny DeVock ran up to the auditorium. They had this balcony where all the audio visual gear was.
I remember that.
She runs up there and she says, "Marc, I have to listen to," and Jenny DeVock, she doesn't know shit about audio. She's the last person in the world that's going to check and make sure the mix is right before we play it. But she comes up there. She's got to check the mix. She's got to be able to say, if Dave asked, she's got to be able to say, yeah, I listened to it before they played it, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so she comes up. Well, in order to play something on headphones, because the auditorium's filled with people, we're about 1 minute away from showing this thing.
Right.
In order to play it on headphones, we got to punch out the subs. We got to kill the subs to play it on the headphones. Otherwise, when we play it for her and just pull the faders down for the auditorium, the subs are going to play in the auditorium because they're hardwired. We have no way to control them. So the only way we can play it for her.
Marc, explain the subs to our listening audience.
It's just these giant speakers that produce the bass frequencies, the lower frequencies, it's really the sound that you feel with your body. Those are those are the frequencies that the subwoofer or the subs produce.
Okay.
So in order to play it for her on the headphones, we have to turn those off.
Oh boy.
So this guy that's with me, Justin Wagner, he turns off the subs. I give her the headphones. We play her like 30, 40 seconds of the film. She listens to it. She gives us the thumbs up like she knows any difference. And then she walks off. We pull the faders back up in the auditorium so the speakers will play. But of course, we don't punch the subs back in. We don't turn the subs back on. They're still punched out. So Dave Miscavige goes out. It's actually comical when you think of it now because he spent like 3 months making sure these subs were the most amazing.
Jesus Christ.
Anyway, he comes out. Says, "Hey, he tells all about this thing that I've been working on this. It's amazing. You're going to love it. It's going to blow you away. You're going to feel it." We play the thing. No subs. It literally sounds like they're in a tin can. And we're in the mix booth and we're listening on the headphones. So we don't hear this. We don't hear that there's no subs either because we're just listening on the headphones up in the booth.
Right.
And I literally have my feet up on the mix board and I'm leaning back like this with my feet up on the mix board. And there's a roof to get to the balcony. So behind stage, there's this room called the green room.
Right.
And that's Dave's like little hangout. That's where he hangs out. That's actually where he spent a lot of time when he was at Flag. He would hang out in this green room area. If he wasn't in his office, he'd be in the green room.
Right.
Anyway, and to get to the green room, to get from the green room to where the balcony is, where all the audio visual gear is, you actually have to walk on this little roof that's above a hallway, an exterior hallway.
I've been there many times. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And you actually have to crawl through this little hatch to get into the balcony. It's like a roof access hatch. It's about 4 feet tall. So no offense, but Dave didn't have to duck down that much, but he did have to duck down a bit to get through that. And he comes busting through that little roof hatch. And I'm sitting there with my feet up on the mix board. And I'm just like, oh shit. He's like, "What happened to the subs?" And I'm like, "Oh." And I go to punch him in, and he's like, no, don't punch him in now. Don't put him on now. Like, you ruined it. It's done. Anyway, so we got sent back to Golden Air in a body bag, and that's when my position changed. I was no longer the quality control anymore. Oh, boy. Anyway, and then after that, I then sort of as when you get busted in Gold, they try to put you down to a post that you'd never want to do again.
Right.
Like most of the time you'll go to grounds and become a lot of people. And this was a big thing. A lot of people, when they got busted from a high post, they would become the D-weeder.
Right. Now, Marc.
And it was always, Yeah.
Mark, I got to tell you something, buddy. We're running up against a time constraint here.
Oh,
I
yeah.
hate because I see from my notes we have a lot more to cover. Is
Yeah.
there any possibility I could get you back so we could wrap this up?
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would very much appreciate it. And this
To
has
be
my,
continued.
yeah, to be continued is right, because I want to get the rest of this story told, but I want to do it justice. And there's no way we can do it in 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay.
So let me do this, and I'll close down, and we'll go over when we can get you back and wrap this up, buddy. So listen, you've been watching Ron Miscavige. That's me on Life After Scientology. All of you who are Patreons, I appreciate it. And if you'd like to support the ongoingness of this show, you're welcome to join and be a Patreon. Just go to my website, The Real Ron Miscavige, and you can sign up there. Meanwhile, I got to thank you, Mark, and I'm awfully sorry, but you got too much good stuff to tell, and I want to do it justice. So we're going to have to get you back. Okay, buddy?
No problem, man. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been my pleasure. So from me, Ron Miscavige, this is Life After Scientology. I'll see you on the next episode.